Hello everybody and welcome to my wrap-up video for the month of July. So this is a good reading month for me. I read 7 books in total, which is a step down from last month, but I have actually started a job this month, so I haven't got as much time to read, although similarly though I do now have a bit more time to read because I have to bus to basically the other side of the country because that's where I got hired. And yes, that's like a couple of hours every week there and back, so I actually got time to now sit and read, which is actually quite nice. And I have recently got my library card sorted out at long last, so it means I'm actually finding a few more books that I can read I don't have to buy, and a lot of them are ones that just kind of aren't really on my TBR, and I'm just kind of picking up as I see them, which I'm actually really enjoying. So yeah. In terms of like, just things that have happened this month, I think we got the only thing I can really think of is we got a cover reveal and a title for the sequel to Legendborn. Oh no, it was just the title reveal for the second book in Legendborn, which is Bloodmarked, which I am so excited for. It's coming out next year. Cannot wait to see what the cover is going to look like. Still gonna call it To Legend, To Born though, like everyone else was, because that's like the best title ever, but Bloodmarked, definitely cool. And the series itself is going to just be called the Legendborn Cycle, which is dead exciting. I currently have my copy of Legendborn out on loan to my friend. Whether or not she's going to actually read it, I don't know. I'll give her another couple of months, then I might just ask for it back. But yeah, anyway, on to the books that I read this month. It wasn't a particularly good reading month for me because a lot of these I was like, meh about, so yeah. This might not be like, I was a bit annoyed because like so many of them were just so like either disappointing, or I very nearly hit a reading slump with one of these books, and yeah, a bit of a step down from June, because June was a fantastic reading month, but hopefully in August, I have just ordered some books, and hopefully in August I'll have a slightly better reading month. The first book I read was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I did do a spoiler-free review of this, so I will leave a link to that up in the cards. And this was one I was quite looking forward to. First of all, beautiful cover by Michaela Alcaino, and it's an Ariadne retelling, and it promises to be, sort of highlighting on the woman who's kind of overlooked in the Theseus myth, and yeah, it's not that. It follows Ariadne's entire life, and whilst this book very clearly, is a very good retelling of the actual myth, or at least one of the actual versions of the myth, following both Ariadne and her sister Phaedra, which I thought was quite interesting to see both of them. It was interesting to see Ariadne's entire life and not just the myth of Theseus, but then again, the myth of Theseus is quite a big part of her life, and that's like the first like tiny chunk of this book. So it's over very, very quickly, and yeah, this book sort of promises to be highlighting women's erasure in myths and in history and things, and giving them back their agency, giving them back their empowerment, yet still manages to be a book where both female characters have very little agency to be shown on page, and both their arcs revolve entirely around men, despite the fact that there is room there for them to like have like other things going on. Yeah, I go into it more in my review. I just was really disappointed by this book, so it was not off to a great start, and yeah, I was a bit upset with this one. Now this is one that I then read after Ariadne, but I still haven't finished it. This is a book that very nearly put into a reading slump, and that is the Octonami. This is a book that I think I saw on TikTok, so someone had ordered it, and it's really cool because like such a cool cover, and like it's got all these like little sort of like things on the inside of the pages, and it's really cool. It comes in this wee little box and you have to unwrap it, and it's shit. So far it is so boring. I'm 150 pages in, and so far nothing's happened, and yeah, I was really quite annoyed about that. It's repetitive. I don't like any of the characters. For some reason there's a sentient narrator, so he sort of pops in, and like it's just pretentious. Like it tries to be funny when it's really not. Like the last chapter that sort of really stopped me to read is like, kind of hard to explain what this book's about. It's like about this sort of like magical secret society, and there's like multiple worlds, but that's never really explained. The magic's never really explained. You've got these people that like can get reincarnated and still have their memories that's like, are part of this magical society, so they've like lived for hundreds of years because they just keep getting reincarnated. Yeah, that's all I really remember, and yeah, as I said, it's just so repetitive and bland, and it doesn't explain things properly. he just throws things at you, but like not in a good way, because I can cope with a book that like just throws you into the world and just goes from there. But this one just does it so badly that yeah, it was not great. And the chapter that really got me to like stop reading this book was the fact that it's got these sort of running gags almost that aren't funny, but they keep bringing them back. And as I said, it's really repetitive. So I was reading this one chapter where there's sort of two main characters you follow are these two brothers, and one of them's like wandering through insulting this one group of people, and then therefore he keeps getting all this like things thrown at him magically by these people he's insulting, and he just keeps going, and the joke is that he doesn't know to stop insulting them, and then they keep throwing things at them, and his brother's just like laughing at him and things and being like, oh, when will he learn that he just needs to not say these things out loud? And that goes on for an entire chapter, and then you think, okay, that's the end of that. We've sort of introduced these people that this guy's insulting, that they're on their way to see. You know, okay, we sort of got his opinion of him, we've got his brother's opinion of it, whatever, we'll now meet them now. No, we then have another chapter of him wandering through this place, insulting them, and then having shit thrown at him. And it's like, that wasn't funny the first time, like, it was really quite a weird plot thing. And now you're doing it again. Yeah, like I said, it's just so pretentious and not funny. And I think the thing that pisses me off is that it cost me like twice or even 3 times what a normal paperback costs. Because I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. Yeah, okay, I'll fork out for it. Yeah, and I hate it, and it almost put me in a book slump because I did not want to read this or any other book for like a week. Because it's just so bad. So I feel like I have to at least try to finish this because I try not to DNF. Also just like at least get my fucking money's worth out of it, but at the same time, I don't think I want to. So then hilariously, to get me out of reading slump, I then read this book that was also bad, but at least it was kind of entertaining, and that was Across the Nightingale Floor by Leon Hearn. And this is a sort of trilogy of books that I got for like £3 in the charity shop, and it's set in a sort of Japanese-inspired fantasy world where you follow this guy who is the sole survivor of the sort of like slaughter of his village, because in his village there's a lot of people who are part of this religion called the Hidden, and in this world the current sort of ruler is persecuting everyone who's from the Hidden, so that's why his village got attacked. And he just happened to be out in the mountains when it happened, so when he came back everyone was dead, and he managed to escape, and he got found by this man who's of the Satori clan, who takes him in and adopts him and raises him as his son. And as he gets older, he finds out that he actually has some sort of like superhuman abilities. He has like the ability to hear absolutely everything, and he then starts to get trained by his sort of adoptive father and his father's friend to be a sort of like, you know, an assassin and things, and it all kind of goes from there. Yeah, it's so, because this was like written in like 2001, and you can kind of tell because it's just so like tropey and cliche at times, and the writing's so weird. It's so like, you know, and then this happened, and then this happened, and you feel very detached from all these characters because, you know, they don't really seem to show emotion half the time. You just kind of get told that they're feeling emotions, but you don't actually feel like they're actually angry or sad or this or that. And I really didn't like the ending of this book because it was like this build up, and then it falls completely flat. And like they kill off a bunch of characters that they like barely developed in the first place, so you're like, well, I don't really care that they're dead because it just feels more like a plot device that they're dead rather than actually, you know, oh no, they've died. Yeah, and oh my god, this book, right, because you follow the main character Takeo, but then you also follow this girl called Cade, who is definitely the best character in this series so far. Like, she is far more interesting. She's a young woman who has been living with this other sort of family, basically as a hostage, her entire life, and she knows she's a hostage. Because the politics in this are kind of interesting when they actually get into it, but like for the beginning it's like you've like put no fucking thought into this. But yeah, she's like as a hostage, and like now she's sort of becoming of an age where they're gonna marry her off, and then she gets engaged. She gets sort of an arranged marriage to marry the main guy's adopted dad. So yeah, and then so that like, you know. So, you know, she's on her way to like marry him, they all meet, and then she and the main guy Takeo fall in love. Now, I am never, ever going to call another case of insta-love, unless it is as bad as the insta-love in this book. Because fucking hell, you can't even call any of the other insta-loves you're thinking of insta-love in comparison to what the fuck goes on in here, because holy shit. Because it's literally, they spent, in this entire book, they have one scene together. One scene. And this is after they've already decided that they're in love with each other from like a fucking distance. And then the only other scene they have in this book is at the end where they bang next to some guy's corpse. Yes, that happens in this book. She kills the Emperor. I'm just going to tell you, this has got spoilers because you're not going to read this because it's shit. She murders the Emperor because he's trying to rape her. And then the guy Takeo comes along and finds them, and she's like kind of covered in this guy's blood, or at least I think she is. And then and then they have sex like 2 meters away from the dead Emperor she's just murdered. And they don't really seem to think anything of that. Oh yeah, and she like falls in love with him like from a distance, and then like has a fever, like she's ill because she's so in love with this guy. It's fucking weird. Like, and then in the next paragraph, she's like, you know, she feels she's going to die if she sees him, or die if she doesn't see him again. And then is like, I'm not going to marry his dad because I have to marry him. It's like, you've seen this guy from like 20 meters away. And now you're like ill because you're in love with him. And that's like never addressed. They're just like, yeah, sure, that's just a thing that happens. And he like has the exact same thing when he meets her later in the one scene they have together before they bang. Oh my god, it's so fucking... I can't believe I've ever called anything insta-love after reading that. I believe this was shortlisted for the fucking Carnegie Medal. I mean, I know the early 2000s was a slightly different time, but Jesus Christ, God, it's so stupid. But yeah, I think I've ranted about this long enough. I did read the second book in this trilogy, so I will get to that later. But yeah, I think I had this like 1.5 stars, maybe 2. But hilariously, because it was short, and because it was so fucking funny, because shit like that happens all the time, I read it in like a day, and then it like got the momentum back for me to like keep reading and stuff, so that was good. But yeah, shit otherwise. Next book I read was The City of Brass, which is a sort of fantasy book set in, originally, it starts off in Cairo, and then they end up in the sort of like, you know, Western Asia, sort of like world where the jinn live and the demons live and things, and God, I can't even remember what this book's about. Basically, you follow this girl who is a sort of like healer. She sort of has the ability to heal people, and she kind of uses that to con people out of money and stuff. And then one day she accidentally summons this deva, which is like a type of jinn, but they don't like being called jinn, they like to be called deva. And yeah, and then he's like, well, you shouldn't have been able to summon me. And then she has ifrits after her, so he's like, right, I'll take you to the city of Deva, which I think was called Devabad. I can't remember. And yeah, and that's it really. You find out more about like who she is and why she's got this power, and you find out more about Deva and the city that she's going to, and this guy that she's with, who is called Dara, that's his name. Her name's Nari and his name's Dara. And yeah, and you also get a point of view from the prince of the guy who's in charge in Devabad, whose name is Ali. And I really liked his chapters actually. I found him to be a really interesting character, but like, I'm explaining this really, really badly. Basically, the first part of this book is so fucking long because it's like Nahari and Dara just travelling to Devabad, and that like takes almost like half the book when it really fucking didn't need to. And I found Nahari's character to be really interesting. I found Ali's character to be really interesting. I couldn't give less of a shit about Dara. He's an interesting character, but at the same time I don't like him. So, but I feel like we're supposed to, and I'm just like, this guy's kind of a dick. Also, Jesus Christ, I mean, I could kind of see this coming like a few chapters in, so I was physically rolling my eyes at this book, but I am so fucking done with the sort of 1,000-year-old man and 20-year-old woman as a couple trope. Like, why is that still a thing? Why is that still getting published? It happens here, you know. Dara's supposed to be like 14,000 years old, or like 1,400 years old, something fucking ridiculous like that. No, yeah, 14,000 I think is actually it. It's like something fucking ridiculous. and yet you're supposed to like root for them as a couple, and you're like, that's weird. No, I've had enough of this. Yeah, and then they get to Daevabad and they find out some things, and you sort of begin, and through Ali's point of view as well as like their point of view once they get there, you sort of understand the sort of politics of that city. And it's quite interesting because you've got these different like clans or tribes of the Jinn and the Deva, and they're all very much, you know, we keep to ourselves and we're suspicious of everybody else, because the city's all very divided, and they often feel that some sections have more favour from like the guy in charge than they do from the, you know, than they do. Like, you know, they feel that there's favouritism going on, you know, there's a lot of unrest and nobody's happy, and anyone who's not fully Deva or fully Jinn, who are like half human or have human blood, are very much mistreated and looked down on and used and abused and stuff, and the sort of Sultan does nothing about that. And yeah, so you've got all these really interesting sort of politics going on. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, but it does get a bit tiring towards the end of this whole, you know, it's us or them, you know, we keep to ourselves sort of politics. That really, like, everyone has that mindset of, oh, I don't trust you because you're a Deva, I don't trust you because you're a this tribe. I can't remember any of their names and I don't have the book with me, because it was a library copy. Yeah, it just gets really tiring that they're like, you know, this section's like this and this clan's like that and I don't trust them, and it's, yeah, it really hits you over the head and just feels a bit tiresome, and you're just like, seriously, is there like no one in the city that is like, hey, these are stereotypes and maybe we should at least try a little bit to get along? But no. Yeah, as I said, I had a huge issue with the age gap in the romance. I fucking hated it. Didn't like Dara's character. Like, I find him interesting as a character because he's like a sort of ex-slave and, you know, has done some atrocious things for his masters and to his masters in the past. And like, he's a really interesting character. I also fucking hate him because he's just so like controlling and I make all the decisions, and, you know, is obviously a 14,000-year-old man preying on a 20-year-old woman. Yeah, but I found Ali's character to be really interesting. He's like the sort of second son of the Sultan, and he's sort of quite conflicted because he wants to help all the sort of like the people who have human blood in them, because he sees that they're being mistreated and feels really bad about it, but then is sort of like forbidden to by his brother and his father, so he's sort of trying to find a way to help them without being caught by them. And Ali and Nahri as well do have quite an interesting friendship that forms later in the book, and I absolutely love their friendship. I think it's so cute. I think they sort of, you know, bond really well. Which, a fucking god, if it becomes a romantic relationship, which I think it probably will, I'm gonna be so annoyed because, like, can we please just like, can we please have a platonic relationship that's like the important relationship in a series, please? Because I'm sick to death of all the romance, especially between, like, you know, male and female characters. Why does it always have to be that they, you know, have to be in a romance? Why can't they just be friends? Because they have such a cute friendship, and I have a feeling they're going to make it into a romance, but I would love for it to be a friendship. Yeah, the first sort of 2/3 of this book were like really slow and really dragged on, and I was just not enjoying it. I felt the travelling with Dara and Nahri went on for too long. This is extra character you're introduced to that you're supposed to give a shit about, but like, I don't. And yeah, but then like the last last third, where all of a sudden like everything just gets going, there's this shit that goes down, one of the characters is off doing some stuff, like, oh my god, it was so good. Like, I loved the ending of this book. I thought it was so good. I'm so intrigued to read the rest of the series now. Like, oh, it just went from like 0 to 100 in like a chapter, and I really just wish the book had been shorter so we could have got there earlier, because it was just fascinating what went on, and I absolutely love it, and I can't wait to read more of the series. But yeah, the rest of this book was really fucking boring. So I think I give it like 3.5 stars, 3 stars really, you know, because as I said, it was really dull. I hated a lot of the characters, and I hated the trope of, you know, old guy, young girl. But then the last sort of bit of the story was just so good, and yeah, definitely going to continue this series. I then read Blackwing by Ed McDonald. This is the best book I've read all month, easily. This I had just seen in a review by Megan's Reading Revelations, and she was sort of, you know, gave a really good description of the book and what she liked and didn't like about it, and I thought this sounded really interesting. So, you know, I added it to my sort of like Goodreads TBR, I'm like, right, I'll get to it eventually, but as it happened, when I went to the library like the next day, they had a copy of it. So I was like, clearly I'm meant to read this book, and I did, and I absolutely loved it. So Blackwing takes place in this world where sort of everyone's sort of at war with these things called the Deep Kings, which are like these sort of like, you know, immortal, impossibly powerful beings. And some time ago, this thing happened that caused this thing called the Misery to be created, which is this sort of section of land that now separates where the Deep Kings are and where the human sort of like settlements are. And it's like full of like almost evil magic that sort of drains the sort of like soul out of you and your sort of strength, and it really just affects you and things. And there's like loads of creatures that live there that you've got to watch out for, and there's like cracks in the sky as well, which I think is such a cool visual. And in this world as well, you have magic users who are called light spinners, so they can like harness moonlight and then use it. And in this world, the light that is spun by the spinners is then used as like electricity, and it powers a lot of their stuff, which I think is a really interesting concept. And it's really interesting how they sort of show how the magic is fully integrated into the workings of the world. You know, they've got like almost like power stations where the light spinners will sit and spin light, and then it will sort of get collected and things at this sort of station. But then they also quite often get abused and will sort of be like, you know, run until they're dead basically from spinning and working, which I thought was just a really interesting idea to just like, you know, just to add to the world building. I love the world building of the story. And you follow this guy who's a sort of like, you know, hardened veteran who does lots of sort of like bounty hunting jobs almost, where he goes after people who quite often are trying to cross the Misery to get to the Deep Kings, because there's this sort of idea of a lot of people see the Deep Kings almost as a religion and trying to get to them to like be part of their army and stuff. So he sort of is one of the people that's dispatched to kill them before they sort of get there. But he also works for this sort of magician called Crowfoot, because in this world you have the Deep Kings, you have the Spinners, but you also have these people called the Nameless, who are like even more powerful like magic users than the Light Spinners, and are also, you know, I think immortal as well. And there used to be lots of them, but now there's only like 3 or 4 left, and Crowfoot is one of them. And our main character, Gale, he works for Crowfoot in the way that like he doesn't really have to do anything until he has this tattoo of a raven on his arm that when Crowfoot wants him to do, or maybe no, it's a tattoo of a crow, obviously. When Crowfoot wants him to do something, it will literally come out of his arm and bark an order at him, and he has to go and do that. So it all sort of gets going where it's been 5 years since his last command from Crowfoot. He kind of feels, oh, maybe I'm finally done with this. And he gets this command to go and protect this woman who's at one of the sort of outpost stations. And yeah, when he gets there, the station's attacked, and he finds out that he actually knows the woman he's supposed to be protecting, and everything kind of really goes from there. You find that, and part of this world as well, one thing that was created around the same time as the Misery was created is this thing called Null's Engine. Null was one of the old Nameless who is now dead, and Null's Engine is this sort of great big sort of weapon that can actually kill Deep Kings, so it's why they haven't attacked for quite some time. But there seems to be this conspiracy theory that Null's Engine no longer works, and that's why the Deep Kings are starting to push, is because they've heard this rumour, so they're trying to test and see if that's true. And yeah, everything really sort of goes from there. You know, he's having to protect this woman called Elizabeth. You find more out about Gale past, because, you know, you sort of get drip fed all these sort of like, you sort of get teased who he used to be and what he was like growing up and how he knows Elizabeth, and just some really interesting things. He's a really, really interesting character. I absolutely love him, and I love his sort of 2 friends that he's sort of been fighting with for quite some time. And Elizabeth's a really great character. She's sort of like almost this sort of like, you know, maths nerd and stuff, and she's really sort of, you know, one of the people that really thinks that Null's Engine is no longer working, but then someone is trying to stop her from like completing her research and silence the rumour that she's like sort of, you know, that's starting basically from her about Null's Engine no longer working. And yeah, it's really hard to describe because there's like a lot going on. I hope I've described that okay, but it's just so good. I absolutely loved the world building, I loved our main character, I loved Elizabeth, I loved the magic system. I just absolutely loved this book so far. And I'm definitely going to be continuing with this series because it ends in such an incredible way, and you really feel like the stakes are rising, you have no idea how they're going to get out of it. If they do, it's just such a good book, especially off the back of so many meh or mediocre books. Like, it's exactly what I needed, and I just absolutely loved it, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I then read Gods of Jade and Shadow. I have got a review out for this already, it should have come out earlier this week, so I'll leave a link to that. And this is a story about a girl who accidentally releases the god of death, that becomes tied to him, and has to help him go across to all these different cities to find the sort of remaining pieces of himself so he can get back to his full strength after being locked in this box for like several decades. It's a really, really great book. It's very oddly paced. It feels very gentle despite the fact that there's like a fucking time limit and everything, and yeah, but I find our two characters to be really, really interesting. Our main character, Cassiopeia, is just a really, really interesting character who is very defiant, stands up for herself, and is just really sort of, you know, really, really comes into her own in this book. And I really just loved her and the god of death, Hunkame. I loved their sort of relationship that forms and how he sort of develops as a character as the book goes on. And it's set in sort of like 1920s Mexico, which I thought was really interesting. You know, I think the setting's really great, the descriptions of all the visuals is awesome. Like, I really, really enjoyed this book, and I don't think I was really expecting to. Like, it wasn't amazing, but I did really, really like it. I go into it more in my review, so I'll leave the link to that. But yeah, I can definitely recommend this book. I think I gave this like 4 stars in the end. Like, yeah, just really, really liked this. I then read The Dragon Round by Stephen S. Power. This is a book I just found in the library that I just saw, you know, it's got dragons in it, and I really like the cover actually. I quite like the sort of painting style. It's about this guy who's a captain of a ship, and in this world there's dragons, and they quite often will attack sort of like the cargo ships and things. So they get attacked by this dragon, and instead of like running away, he decides to turn around and fight it and things, and they do win, but then because he decided to turn around, and they did lose a lot of like their crew in the meantime, the rest of his crew decide that they're going to have a mutiny, and they give him the captain's chance, which is like, you know, they'll leave him on a boat, and if he survives, great, but you know, that you're very unlikely to survive. It's just a sort of, you know, way to kill someone without actually killing them yourself, almost type of thing. So he's given this chance and is just left in this boat in the middle of the sea with this one character who's like the sort of like healer that was on their boat, because she refused to go along with the mutiny, so they were like, right, well, you can just go with him. And they do manage to get to an island and stuff, and when they get there, they manage to find some food, and they manage to sort of you know, keep themselves alive, and then they find this dragon egg that hatches, and they decide to raise the dragon to, you know, be able to be ridden, and they can then get themselves off the island. And everything kind of goes from there, but it's just such a weirdly written book. Like, you jump perspectives like practically mid-sentence half the time. You're following all these characters that you just don't know anything about. The world building is just not built at all. You're very, you know, you're not really, you're meant to believe that there's all these different countries with their stereotypes and, you know, almost similar to the City of Brass, sort of an us versus them sort of mentality, but you're never actually told where these places are, what makes them different from anywhere else. You're just told, oh, he's Hanoshi and she's Yunesi or something. It's like, you know, you don't actually know where all these places are and what the significance of them being from that country is. And yeah, the characters again just don't develop, and they're just really quite bland, and yeah, it's just a really strange book, because the first half is them on their island, and the second half is just him like enacting his revenge, and it really just takes a complete 180 from just following these two characters to then following like 5 characters that you only sort of care about. And yeah, there's like, you know, and again it's like, you know, it's the thing where, and then this happened, and this happens, and this happens, and now I have a time skip, and now I'm going to, you know, there's so many characters where they just like, you know, will describe them as the woman, and you're like, who's that meant to be? Is that, you know, who's this meant to be? And the woman character, who's Everin, she's easily the best character, yet you spend like barely any time in her point of view, which is so annoying because she's just easily the best character. Yeah, so I didn't really enjoy this bit. I was like, it was alright, but not great. Randomly towards the end it has a paragraph with a cameo from the cabbage seller from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
My cabbages! You're gonna pay for this!
2 cabbages, please.
Randomly, just in the book, he just decided to put in the cabbage seller. Like, what? And unfortunately for Stephen Parrott, that was the best part of it. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this book, it was really dull. And then the last book I read was Grass for His Pillow, which is the sequel to Across the Nightingale Floor, and now that I'm used to the writing style and the fact that, you know, Cade and Takeo are supposed to be in love with each other, despite the fact that it's like the worst love story ever, I actually found myself enjoying this one. But like, Cade just becomes such a fantastic character in this because she really stands on her own 2 feet and actually decides that she's going to make a space for herself in a man's world. And I love arcs like that, especially in like hugely patriarchal societies where the women then decide, no, I can do just as well as men, if not better. So she goes down this path of like, you know, claiming her inheritance and taking up sort of the mantle that some characters in the last book have sort of left for her, and she just becomes such a fascinating character in this, and I absolutely loved seeing her. I love seeing her friendship with her friend Suzuka, and how she's just suspicious of like everyone, and I just found it was so interesting to sort of see things from her point of view. Takeo's just kind of, you know, I mean, this is also like, you know, Grass for His Pillow more like the story of Takeo and his various baby mamas, because man does not know how to keep it wrapped. Jesus Christ. There are so many, oh, and then he slept with them and then they became pregnant, and you're like, dude. So, yeah, the rest of this book's alright. Like, the political stuff was quite interesting, and the sort of, you know, the fallout of what happens at the end of the first book was quite interesting and things. And as I said, though, the best part was definitely just Cade and how she, you know, really starts to come into her own in this book, and, you know, just becomes really quite clever and quite almost manipulative in her situation, which I really loved seeing. You get to know a bit more about this group of people that you meet in the first book, and they were quite interesting, but at the same time I still felt like we didn't spend enough time with them, so they're meant to be this great big threat, yet we barely actually see them. Yeah, it's just, but like similarly, like, you know, there's another sort of thing where it's just like, you know, and then this happened, and there's this big reveal towards the end, and like, it's just so like detached. You don't really feel the emotion that Takeo is supposed to be feeling about this. You're just sort of told, oh, he was shocked, and you're like, is he though? Because I'm not feeling particularly shocked right now. Yeah, but it was really interesting. You know, there's a lot of characters that in the sort of first book who've died now. It's actually quite interesting to then see actually they knew a lot more than they were letting on, and were actually quite different people to what we thought. I did quite like that. But I guess my biggest sort of problem with this book series as well, just in general, is that it's very clearly, you know, a Japanese-inspired story written by a white woman, or at least written by a non-Japanese person. It really does just feel like a sort of non-Japanese Japanese person's just idea of what maybe Japan would be like in the sort of time period it's set in. Even though it's like a Japanese-inspired fantasy world, it's not actually set in Japan. It doesn't just, you know, I don't know, it just feels a bit, you know, but there's a lot of sort of like, you know, a lot of people that are like, I must kill myself because I have dishonoured my family, and there's a tea ceremony that's just kind of there, and yeah, it just feels a bit weird. But I did hilarious. But halfway through this book, I was sort of, you know, oh yeah, great. It's like, am I fucking enjoying this? What? But yeah, better than the first one. Mostly just because Cade's a badass and I love her. And that's the only reason I'm going to be continuing the last book in this series. And also because I bought it, so I might as well. But yeah, I think I gave this 3 stars because hilariously, I actually enjoyed this one. And that's the end of my, basically, I've realised I think I've just spent the entire time ranting about most of those books. I'm so sorry. I didn't enjoy a lot of them though. They were either boring or weird or just really disappointing. But yeah, hopefully in August I have a slightly better reading month. So, but yeah, 7 books, not too bad. I managed to save off a reading slump, which I'm quite impressed about. And yeah, I'm hoping that I'll have slightly better reading months in the future. I did kind of have myself on a book buying ban for July because I had like buses to pay for and things. So a lot of the books were just dictated by what I had access to, either from charity shops or from the library. So hopefully I'll be able to, I did order a few books the other day that are all ones I really want to read, so fingers crossed August will be a better reading month for me. But yeah, what did you read this month? How many books did you read? What do you think of the books that I've been reading? Have you read any of them? What did you think? Let me know down in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. If you've watched to the end of this video, you clearly enjoyed it, so you might as well leave it a like. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.